All right, welcome back. Programming 11. We are working on our bullet hell game, and we got a rather square looking spaceship who is flying through a field of stars. And we'd like to go and make a whole bunch of new fun things. I mean, bullet hell is called bullet hell because of all the bullets that end up on the screen. So we gotta, do something about that. We gotta add in some bullets. But there's a just something I want you to consider as we move forward, and that is, bullets are objects, and there's gonna be a lot of them on the screen, kind of like stars. But right now, wrong project. Yeah, right now we have an array list that is being looped through. It's specifically, I should say, it is a star array list, right? It's an array list of stars. We have a loop that goes through all the stars and tells them to act and show and removes them if they're dead. In other words, if they go off screen. But it would require an entire new array list to process all our bullets and a loop for that array list. And also, if we add in enemies, if we add in other cool effects like particles from an explosion or, any other cool thing in our game, we're going to need brand new array lists and loops, and that's not great. it's a bit unwieldy. So what would be nice is if we could stick all of our game objects, all the objects that are in the game, into one loop, and that one loop processes everything in the game. That would be pretty fantastic. So, what does that look like? Well, we have to change our array list so that it doesn't just include stars; it includes like all the different kinds of game objects. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to make a new kind of class, which is sort of a foundational class. It's going to have all of the commonalities between the different kinds of classes in the game, and we're going to build that in to a class, and we're going to call that the GameObject class. And we're going to treat that kind of like a category, and we'll make things like the stars and the bullets and the starfighter and the enemies and the particles all part of that category, so that we can make an array list of anything that belongs in that category. So that's the goal. We're going to make what's called a superclass. So the superclass is going to be the foundation for these other classes. So we're going to make some changes to Star and Starfighter. But first, I'd like to just take a look and see if you kind of spot some similarities here, right? So in the Star, look at our instance variables. Starfighter, same thing. So there's a lot of things that are in common. In the Star class, the constructor initializes things differently than the Starfighter. So, those aren't that common. But the fact that these variables are very common leads me to believe that, we could put this into a superclass and use that as a foundation for both Starfighter and Star. There's some other similarities too, right? Like I think we have this kind of code and this kind of code in both Star and Starfighter. There and there. And I think, there and there. So those are the similarities. And let's build that into a separate class. So I'm going to make a new tab. I'm going to make a class called GameObject. Class GameObject. And again, this class represents sort of a foundation of what's common between all of our different classes in the game. So definitely things like these instance variables are common. So I'm going to go to GameObject. I'm going to paste those in. And we will have a constructor, but we don't necessarily need it right now. And we will have an act function and a show function. And then let's put in all the common stuff. So there's not really a lot of stuff that's in common for GameObject. Except, I guess there's one thing that's very much in common. What's in common is that we assign all the values. It's always x equals this, y equals that, vx equals this, size equals that. The same kind of thing is going on, but there's different values. So we'll come back to think about how to connect the values together. We'll come back to that. let's focus on things like the act and show. So the act, there is something that's in common between the act and show. The act methods. They have this kind of movement code and this kind of movement code. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that into GameObject. And then what's in common between all the show functions? Well, they're basically the same show function. There's this code is in both star and starfighter. So let's put that in our show function. Okay, so this doesn't represent anything in particular. You know, a GameObject isn't a physical thing that we see. It's just like a category of things. And what we can do in order to kind of confirm that this GameObject isn't meant to be any kind of physical thing that's in our game, I'm going to put the abstract keyword here. I'm going to call this an abstract class. It's basically meant to be a category, an idea, a foundation for other classes. And so this GameObject is going to become a, the comp sci word for foundational class is a superclass. So we're going to actually build our other classes on top of this GameObject class. So here's what I'm going to do. I'll show you what this looks like. In star, I'm going to say, instead of just class star and like repeat myself over and over again, I'm going to say class star extends GameObject. So what does the extends keyword mean? It basically means that GameObject is going to be a foundation which I'm going to build upon. It also means, in terms of the words, GameObject is star's superclass. And you can also say star is GameObject's subclass. So those are just some words that we'll kind of be throwing around. So what does that mean? Well, it means I don't actually have to program in the instance variables. Whatever class you extend, you get all those instance variables as well. So every star will have an X and a Y and a VX and a VY and a size and a color and a lives. Those are all be built in. Hey, if I do the same thing over here for Starfighter, extends GameObject. Amazing. I don't have to type those in either. And any new class that I create, like a bullet or an enemy or whatever, I don't have to retype those things out. I can add new things, but I don't have to. I can just get all the old things. Okay, so that's nice. Let's see what's next. So next, I guess I have, maybe I'll do the show function. So in my star class, the show function is exactly the same as in the super class, right? Here's star, here's GameObject. They're the same. So I don't even have to type in the show function inside of star. So now star doesn't actually have a show function, but that's okay because when you extend GameObject, you get all of its functions. So it gets this show function from GameObject. So star, I don't actually have to type in a new show function. Same with Starfighter. It's the same. So I'm just going to get rid of it. See you later. And just to confirm, even though Starfighter and Star don't have GameObjects, they don't have show functions, if I run the project, you'll see they still show up. Right? There's the star, there's the spaceship, the Starfighter, and that's because, again, because we are extending GameObject, they get all the instance variables and all the functions. Now you might notice that I get an act function, but I also still have an act function. And in Starfighter, I also have an act function. So what's going on here? So this is called overriding. So Starfighter extends GameObject, for example. So it gets GameObject's act function, but then it overrides it. It's like, yeah, this doesn't, not quite for me. I'm making my own. And so that's cool, but it still, still works just fine. Now, I do see a similarity though. I kind of want to have this in there. I want to have that in there. And that's also in the act function. So how could I make them all, in the GameObject's act function. So how can I just type this once in act in the GameObject in the superclass and have my subclasses just sort of inherit that? So what you can do is what's called partially overriding a class. So instead of typing those two things in there, I can say super.act. And so now this function is partially overridden. And essentially what's happening is I call the superclass's act function, which is you know, this code here. It's just the movement code. And so I don't have to retype it every time. So that works for star. It also works for starfighter. Now I can't put it at the bottom here. If I try to put super.act, it won't like it being on the bottom. Oh, I guess it didn't mind. Okay, never mind. Guess you could put it here. I tend to put those on the top. I guess it's just a constructor where that matters. I'm gonna stick it on the top anyways. But I think that's this will be helpful. So you might be thinking, okay, wow, what did I do in this video? You know, I haven't really, nothing has changed in the project. But what we've done is we've set ourselves up for success in future activities. When we design a new class, you know, we can build it on the foundation of the game object. We don't have to type in all those variables. You know, we don't have to add in the movement code. We can just call that automatically. We don't even have to necessarily program in a show function. It's going to be built in as soon as we extend GameObject. So it just saves us time of things we don't have to worry about. Okay, so that's the GameObject, you know, creating the GameObject class. Now let's go and change our array list. So here's where it gets, I think, really powerful. This is going to be now GameObject. And actually, maybe before I do that, let's just rename stars to objects. So I'm going to use the rename tool here. I'll just rename it everywhere. Objects. And it's going to be called GameObject. So now this array list contains only game objects. That can be a star, that can be a starfighter, that can be a bullet eventually, and an enemy, and all sorts of things. It's going to cause some problems here, like I got to go fix this now. So this is now game object, and in the game, I have to change this to be, so the in-game function. You know, I'm not getting a star necessarily, I'm getting a game object. Okay, so now this loop will process whatever it is I put inside of it. Starships, bullets, like you name it. This has now become really a game engine now. Instead of a star engine for processing stars, it now processes all the things that are in my game. It's a small, you know, primitive game engine. It's not like the Unreal, you know, engine or whatever, but it is a simple game engine. So I think it's a pretty cool achievement to have made it in Program 11, to have created this sort of automatic processing system for all the entities that will be in our game. I wanted to do that early on because, you know, we can now just use this engine and build upon it. I think it'll be pretty great. So, you know, right now we only have, you know, stars in our list. But just to show you that we could put our spaceship in there, our starfighter, I should say, I'm going to put this objects.add player 1. And I'm going to get rid of this code here, the player1.showAndAct, just to demonstrate that, you know, it does work. Like, this list will process stars and starfighters and all the other things. So here it is. There, see, it's working. I'm not explicitly calling the act and show functions manually. It's just inside of that list. It's one of those 200, 300-ish items that are in the list. When students do this, they might notice that the stars are now on top. So this isn't necessarily a good choice. I just kind of wanted to do it to demonstrate. So you could leave, you know, player1.show and player1.act here. Another thing you can do is when you add new stars, you could add them like this. Like, you could basically add the star to the beginning of the list, and so then the player always ends up at the end of the list. So that's another way to do it. So there we go. We got ourselves now a game engine, and I'm excited to move on to the next step, which will be adding bullets. And I think when we do the bullet, you know, class, I think you'll see that it is like, all this work has been for a really good purpose. Like, when we go to design that bullet class in the next video, I think you're going to see, like, oh, wow, this is why we did it. It makes things pretty simple. Okay, so stay tuned for that video. Okay, thanks, everybody. Oh, yeah. Bye.